950. Real Texas, Real Talk. KPRC Houston, an iHeart radio station.
4:33 our time here on AM 950 KPRC. Depending on how you look at it, it's either day 2 or day 3 of the Senate trial. I guess it's technically day 3, day 2 of actual testimony. Today it was about laying out the case for the danger that this president presents. His abuse of power. His abuse of power, which is one of those things they want to impeach him on, even though it's not really a crime, near as I can tell, even if he were guilty of it. Even defining it's difficult. At any rate, here to talk a little impeachment stuff with us is a guy we've talked to many times on similar topics, Nathaniel Cogley, Ph.D., head of the Department of Government, Legal Studies and Philosophy, assistant professor of political science at Tarleton State University here in Texas. You were teaching a class yesterday afternoon. Are you all covering this in your class, the impeachment trial?
Well, that particular class is research methods, so we're not getting into the impeachment trial, but we have upper division courses on American politics that would be.
Okay. And what kind of opinion do you get from the students on this?
Well, the students are, not following the testimony. It's hard enough for everyone to follow the testimony. Everyone has day jobs. But the students, sometimes, fall within the typical parties, people who support or are opposed to this impeachment trial, or many who don't, care.
Let me run this past you, because I found this was kind of interesting. I've seen a lot of pro-impeachment protesting going on, and I saw a picture yesterday, and I forget where this was at, but the sign is what stuck in my head. The sign basically said, "Out with Trump Pence," as if, and it kind of made me wonder, do they realize that even if they were successful in impeaching President Trump, that Mike Pence would become president of the United States? They're not getting rid of, you aren't impeaching both of them together.
Right. So, I think that shows some of the irrationality that's kind of driving this. Now, I have seen some theories on the fringe that both Trump and then Pence should both be impeached, thus making Nancy Pelosi the president of the United States. But this is like totally, far-fetched. We're a million miles from this. But this kind of irrationality, I think, is what's driving some of this. The media, much of the media has been out to get Trump. And what's that done is that's made 85% of Democrats really want to move on impeachment. And what happens is Nancy Pelosi sometimes presents herself as a moderate, but she's not from a moderate district. She's from a very far left district of San Francisco. And when 85% of your district wants to impeach, you have to move. When we look at this team, Pelosi's making this decision, but Adam Schiff is from Burbank, Jerry Nadler's from Manhattan, Zoe Lofgren's from San Jose, Hakeem Jeffries from Brooklyn. They're from very far left districts where the voters want to move on this, and the voters in their district think it's going to be a good result, think it might impeach Trump. Some are so crazy enough to think it might impeach Trump and Pence. But, of course, this is never going to happen, but they just have to move anyway because their districts are so extreme.
I noticed that you wrote an opinion piece for the Washington Examiner the other day, I think back in the middle of the month, on the 16th, it titled, "With its dubious finding on impoundment, GAO passed the buck." And I assume you're talking about the GAO finding that what the president did was illegal.
Yeah, exactly. So thanks so much for highlighting that op-ed in the Examiner. It's the third in the series that I wrote on the topic of Impoundment Control Act and the impeachment case against the president. One thing that's very interesting as I dug into the Impoundment Control Act was this potential dispute between the president and the Congress is addressed in the Impoundment Control Act. If the president he's allowed to temporarily defer funds within the fiscal year. If he doesn't send a special message, Comptroller General should write a report that's interpreted as a special message. And we never got to this, but if the president is supposed to obligate funds and he doesn't, Section 687 says that's a civil case in U.S. District Court in Washington, D.C., and the Comptroller General is supposed to bring about a civil case, not a criminal case, a civil case. So as I'm writing all those things up, we didn't hear from the Comptroller General. He had nothing to say And then finally, on the day the trial begins, the GAO comes out, signed by their general counsel, but the GAO is run by the Comptroller General, blowing up, small little civil cases into big impeachment. Trump's not faithfully executing the laws. And by the way, they exonerate themselves from any obligation that they're supposed to play a role under the Impoundment Control Act. I found the whole GA report timing very suspicious. I found the arguments very suspicious and self-fulfilling. And I think that's one of the aspects that's still going to be addressed in this impeachment trial, is to counter what the GAO has put there as a new piece of evidence against the president. There's going to be, the OMB disagrees, and the Trump's team's also going to be able to disagree with that finding.
The entrenched bureaucracy in Washington, D.C. is just fighting with each other over all this. In addition to finding Trump, they're fighting with each other over things they're trying to implicate him on that may or may not have any validity at all, and for the most part don't seem to have any validity. It feels maybe a good thing is going to happen here. Is it possible that the bureaucracy is going to get blown up a little bit in this process? Yeah,
I mean, Americans are very aware that we have partisan divisions, and the Democrats control the House and the Republicans control the Senate. But what we're seeing is also this disagreement between the GAO and the OMB, and they disagree about the law. And we sometimes view these civil servants as impartial and objective, but they're put in place by certain people. So the Comptroller General was nominated to a 15-year term and confirmed by a Democratic Senate in 2010. Is he impartial? Well, we might think he's impartial if he's acting impartial, but when he completely ignores the duties to resolve this dispute and to follow the Impoundment Control Act and to bring a civil case if he feels it's necessary. Instead, we get these big constitutional accusations on the day the trial begins. We see that there could be some partisanship motivation here. So, D.C. itself, the civil service itself, sometimes exhibits too much partisanship.
I don't know how much of the testimony the last couple of days you've been able to watch, Dr. Cogley. It feels like they could have wrapped this up about 8 hours ago, because we just seem to be hashing over the same points over and over and over again. And yet, for some reason, these House managers feel compelled to just use up every second of allotted time.
Yeah, exactly. And I think one interesting thing is the difference between the teams. The House managers are themselves representatives, and priority one for them is to play to their home district. They're active politicians, and I know there's 6 law degrees out of the 7 of them, and they have some experience and skills, but their priority is to play to the home district, so they're not going to miss the opportunity on TV to play to the home district, whereas the president's team is a professional team designed to win this case efficiently. In the introduction, you said we're on day 3 of the trial, and I thought something Adam Schiff said today was very interesting. He said, after we make our presentation, and after the President's Counsel makes their presentation, and after you have 2 days of questioning, then the trial will begin. What's interesting is they're setting up this whole narrative of why they lost the case. Nadler the other day said, if you don't bring in witnesses, you're complicit with Trump in the cover-up. Schiff just said today, if we don't bring in witnesses, there isn't a trial, right? And that kind of defies the logic of what's actually happening this week.
Amazing. I guess the good news is for the president is, we've heard all this BS, if you will, from these House members, and we've heard it over and over and over again. And I think you're right. I think there's a lot of fatigue on this with your average American, but I think they will perk up when the president's defense presents its case, because we have not heard from the president's side in all this. We've seen what the president's tweeted and a few of the things he said, but we have not seen a timeline or anything else presented like we're going to see once this gets going for the president's case.
Well, I agree with you. The House managers, we've heard their case. We saw what they constructed in the committees and the reports that they filed. We haven't heard from the president's team. On the House side, we heard from Republican representatives who were defending the president on his behalf, but it wasn't actually the president's team. And then I do think a very interesting moment will be when the senators can ask written questions. That's going to kind of be fun to try to figure out who's asking which question. I assume they're going to be anonymous, but I'm not sure. And that'll be fun to see the lines of questioning when you give Republicans a chance to ask Adam Schiff a question, right? This will be kind of fun once we get to that questioning moment.
Yep, and we will see what happens, too, when they start voting on whether or not they're taking witnesses, and if they are, which witnesses they will allow and which ones they won't, because a whole lot of people want to hear from Joe and Hunter Biden, and I think the chances of that happening are still pretty slim, aren't they?
I think the odds of Joe and Hunter Biden testifying are very slim. You know, it's not really a case on did they do something wrong, but did the president have a valid reason to want an investigation? Did the president think there might be something wrong? We already know from the phone call, the president says it looks horrible what's going on there. We kind of already document that the president thought there's legitimately something wrong to look into. And I do think maybe Hunter Biden should testify. It might not be in this trial, but maybe in a different setting that's specifically looking at those activities. I'm of the mind that there might be a witness. I just don't think it's going to be the big bombshell witnesses that are talked about in the media. Like, is it going to be Bolton and Hunter Biden? I think we'll get the Republicans from swing states that swing the vote on this thing. They would like to say they called a witness, but they're not trying to, swing the case towards the Democrats or anything like that. I think we might get someone from OMB to explain why OMB feels the law was followed, to kind of counteract that GAO report that came out. But a kind of minor witness where those moderates, Republicans from swing states can say, yes, we did call a witness. We did try to look into some things, and at the end of the day, it was not guilty.
All right, Mr. Cogley, thank you as always. Good to talk to you, sir. Professor, take care, and we will talk again, I'm sure. Dr. Nathaniel Cogley, he's at Tarleton University here in Texas. Back with more in a moment. Jimmy Barrett, AM 950, KPRC.